My father bought the padlock in 1991, the year he handed me the deed. It sat in the ranch office drawer for 22 years. I knew where it was the entire time. In November, I finally needed it. At 7 a.m. on a Monday morning in early December, I drove to the western gate with two things in the truck: a closure notice my attorney prepared, and that padlock. I posted the notice on the gate, 2 pages, plus attachments: the certified boundary survey, the chain of title analysis, and the 1991 road deed showing fee simple ownership with no recorded easement of any kind. Then I threaded the chain through, snapped the lock shut, and drove back to the ranch to feed the cattle. The first car arrived at 4:47 p.m. The driver read the notice, sat in her car for a long moment, and reversed. By 5:30 p.m., Walt Pruitt, my neighbor, 35-year civil engineer, counted 27 vehicles backed up on the approach road. Drivers standing in the December cold, reading the deed attached to the gate, talk to each other in the quiet register of people discovering that the road they've driven every day for 22 years belongs to someone else. Someone who never said a word about it. 6 weeks earlier, the Pinnacle Ridge HOA had fenced, padlocked, and tagged that same road with a laminated sign: Pinnacle Ridge HOA, Community Perimeter, Authorized Access Only. Fresh concrete on the post footings, 6 strands of barbed wire, a padlock that wasn't theirs to put there. The road had been in my family since my father graded it by hand in 1978. It was recorded in the county deed office in 1979, conveyed to me in 1991, unencumbered in every instrument for 44 years. They fenced it without pulling the deed. My attorney read the file in September and told me one thing: document everything. Don't say a word. I already knew where the padlock was. Before we get into it, let me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more bangers like this. Cord Baxter has driven the western perimeter road of his ranch every morning for 34 years. Not out of routine exactly, but out of the particular attentiveness of a man who understands that 420 acres of working cattle land requires daily eyes, and that problems on a ranch, like problems in most things, are smaller when you find them early. He drives it at 6:52 a.m. on a Wednesday in early November, with his coffee in the console cup holder and the radio off. The way he drives it every morning, watching the fence lines, watching the cattle in the lower pasture, watching the light come up over the eastern plateau, where the Pinnacle Ridge subdivision sits above the valley in its rows of identical roof lines and carefully maintained yards. He has watched that plateau for 22 years, since the developer graded it and built 287 homes on it, and connected those homes to the county highway via the road that runs along his western boundary. The road that has been in his family since his father graded it by hand in 1978, and that has been in the county deed records under the Baxter name since 1991. He comes around the cedar break at the southwestern corner of the property and stops the truck. The fence is across the road. He sits with the engine running for a moment, looking at it through the windshield. It is a new installation. The posts are fresh set, the concrete footing visible at the base of each one still pale against the surrounding soil, the barbed wire strands taut and bright in the early morning light without the oxidation that comes with age. 6 strands, the same gauge and configuration as the fence that went up along his southern boundary 6 weeks ago. A metal swing gate is centered in the installation, padlocked with a chain that carries a laminated tag he can read from the truck without getting out. Pinnacle Ridge HOA, Community Perimeter, Authorized Access Only. He looks at the fence for a long moment. This is the second fence. The first fence appeared on a Monday morning in mid-September. 6 strands of barbed wire running the full length of his southern boundary, installed by a contractor Cord had watched working from across the pasture over the preceding 3 days, without initially understanding what they were building or precisely where. When the installation was complete, and he drove the southern boundary road to examine it, he found the fence running not along the HOA's property line, but along his, 25 to 31 inches inside his recorded deed, enclosing a continuous strip of his grazing land in a clean, professionally installed line that bore the same Pinnacle Ridge HOA laminated tags at regular intervals. He had received a letter from Sandra Hollis the previous week, a single page on HOA letterhead, informing him that the board had approved a community perimeter definition project, that a licensed contractor had been retained, and that the installation would enhance security and provide a clear visual boundary for the Pinnacle Ridge community. The letter was cordial, slightly administrative in tone, and contained no request for his input, no reference to any survey confirming the fence line position, and no acknowledgement that the southern boundary of the HOA's community and the southern boundary of his ranch were 2 different lines, separated by 25 to 31 inches of his property. He had photographed the letter. He had photographed the fence. He had called Meredith Kane. He had said nothing to Sandra Hollis or to anyone at the HOA. That was 6 weeks ago. The second fence is different in a way that changes everything. The first fence was a boundary encroachment. Unauthorized, documented, legally actionable, and sitting in Meredith's growing file alongside Philip Oakes's preliminary boundary measurements and the chain of title analysis she had commissioned within 48 hours of his first call. It was trespass on his grazing land, and it was going to be addressed, and Meredith had told him from the beginning that the correct time to address it was after the record was complete and not before. The second fence is not a boundary encroachment. The second fence is across his road. Cord sets his coffee in the holder and gets out of the truck. He walks to the fence and stands in front of the gate. He looks at the padlock. He looks at the laminated tag. He reads it again, as if the second reading might produce different text than the first. It does not. Pinnacle Ridge, HOA, Community Perimeter, Authorized Access Only. He examines the post anchoring on both sides of the gate. The posts are set in concrete, sunk to a depth that suggests a contractor who expected them to be there for a long time. He looks north along the fence line. It runs perpendicular to the road for as far as he can see before it reaches the northern tree line, sealing the road's western approach from the ranch side. He looks south, the same installation running to the southern fence line, connecting to the perimeter fence that went up 6 weeks ago, and completing a western enclosure that, from above, would read on a map as the HOA's community boundary, running cleanly from south to north, along what Sandra's contractor apparently believes is the HOA's western edge. It is not the HOA's western edge. It is Cord's road. He takes his phone out of his jacket pocket and photographs the gate from 3 positions, straight on, from the north angle, from the south. He photographs the padlock and the laminated tag in close-up. He photographs the post anchoring and the concrete footing. He photographs the fence line running north and south from the gate installation. He notes the time in his ranch logbook, which he carries in the truck's door pocket the way his father carried it before him. Not a habit exactly, more a reflexive professional practice. The understanding that a rancher's logbook is a legal document as much as an operational one and should be treated as such. He writes, 6:54 a.m., Wednesday, November 5th. Second HOA fence installation, north-south, across access road at western boundary. Gate, padlocked, HOA tag. Posts set in concrete, fresh pour. Fence connects to southern boundary installation. Road completely blocked. Photographed. He caps the pen, closes the logbook, and calls Meredith Kane. She picks up on the third ring. It is early, but Meredith has never been difficult to reach when the situation warrants it. And in 34 years of ranching, Cord has developed a reliable instinct for which calls warranted, and which can wait until business hours. This one does not wait. He tells her what he is looking at. He describes the installation, the gate, the padlock, the tag, the post depth, the connection to the southern fence. He tells her the road is completely blocked. He tells her the installation appears to have gone in overnight, or early this morning. The concrete at the post footings is still damp in the morning cold. Meredith is quiet for a moment. They fence the road, she says. Not a question. A statement delivered in the particular register of an attorney, processing a development that is simultaneously worse than expected and better for the case than anything she could have engineered herself. They fence the road, Cord confirms. She asks if he has photographs. He tells her he has photographs of everything. She tells him 3 things in sequence, in the flat and certain manner of someone issuing field instructions to a person she trusts to follow them precisely. First, do not touch the fence, the gate, or the lock. Do not attempt to remove or bypass any element of the installation. Second, do not contact Sandra Hollis or any HOA representative today or at any point until Meredith tells him to. Third, drive the full installation and photograph every post, both fence lines connecting to it and any additional HOA signage or hardware he finds. She wants the complete photographic record of the installation in her hands by end of day. Cord tells her he will have it to her by noon. She tells him one more thing before she hangs up. She tells him this changes the timeline. The southern boundary fence was trespass on grazing land. Serious, documented, actionable, and building toward a filing that was 2 to 3 weeks away. The road closure fence is something else. It is the HOA asserting physical control over the only road connecting 287 households to the county highway. A road the HOA does not own, has never owned, and for which no recorded access right of any kind exists. It is not a boundary miscalculation. It is a structural claim of authority over private property, and the legal consequences of that claim are considerably more immediate than a fence line discrepancy in a grazing pasture. They've handed us everything, Meredith says. Don't say a word to anyone. Cord ends the call and gets back in the truck. He puts it in gear and begins driving the fence line north, following the new installation from the gate position toward the tree line, his camera on the seat beside him, the logbook open on the console. He photographs every post. He photographs both connections, the northern terminus where the road fence meets the tree line, and the southern connection where it joins the perimeter fence. He photographs the HOA signage at 3 additional positions along the installation. He notes, in the logbook, that the concrete at the post footings transitions from damp at the gate position to fully cured at the northern end of the installation, suggesting the work ran south to north over a 2-day period, ending sometime in the past 12 hours. He finishes the documentation run at 8:15 a.m. and sits in the truck at the northern tree line, looking south along the new fence with the long, considered attention of a man reading a landscape he has known since childhood. The fence line is straight and clean and professionally installed. From where he sits, it looks permanent, the kind of installation that expects to be there for decades, that expects the situation it creates to be the situation that continues. He looks at it for a while. He has worked this land since he was 12 years old. He has run cattle on it through drought years and wet years, through 3 recessions and 1 flood that took out the southern creek crossing and required 6 months to rebuild. He has managed the road since his father handed it to him with the deed, not as a burden, not as a legal instrument, simply as part of the property, the way the creek and the cedar breaks and the upper pasture are part of the property. He has let 287 households drive it every day for 22 years, without complaint or condition, because his father taught him that being a good neighbor costs nothing until someone makes it cost something. Someone has made it cost something. He picks up the logbook and adds a final entry for the morning. The handwriting is the same steady, unhurried script his father used in the volumes that precede this one on the shelf in the ranch office. The same hand, the same economy of language, the same understanding that a logbook entry is not a place for emotion, but for fact. 8:17 a.m. Full fence documentation complete. 23 posts photographed with positions. Both connections documented. HOA signage at 4 locations. Concrete cure pattern suggests 2-day installation ending overnight. Road blocked, no bypass. Meredith notified. No contact with HOA. Proceeding per council. He closes the logbook, puts the truck in gear, and drives back to the ranch house to begin the work of waiting, which is the hardest work a patient man does when the situation calls for patience, and everything around him is pushing toward reaction. He does not call Sandra Hollis. He does not remove the fence. He drives back to the ranch, uploads the photographs to the shared file Meredith set up in September, heads the cattle on the eastern pasture rotation, and spends the rest of the morning doing the ordinary work of running a 420-acre cattle operation, which is the same work he has done every morning for 34 years, regardless of what anyone has installed on his property overnight. At 11:30 a.m., Meredith calls to confirm she has received the photographs. She tells him the installation is exactly what they needed it to be. He asks what comes next. She tells him the record is close. Philip Oakes needs 2 more field days to finalize the certified plat. The chain of title analysis is complete. Sandra's original letter is in the file. The new fence photographs are in the file. When Philip delivers the certified plat, they are ready. And then, Cord asks. And then, Meredith says, we let her know whose road she fenced. Cord sets the phone down on the kitchen table and looks out the window toward the western boundary, where the new fence stands across his road in the November light, padlocked and tagged, and entirely certain of its own authority. He makes a second cup of coffee and goes back to work. The road begins with a tractor and a blade on a September morning in 1978. Raymond Baxter was 44 years old that fall, a first-generation rancher who had purchased the valley land in 1971 with a combination of inherited savings and a production loan he spent 7 years paying down, and who had spent the intervening years building the operation from raw pasture into a working cattle ranch, with the methodical patience of a man who understood that land rewards the people who pay attention to it over the long term, rather than the ones who need it to perform immediately. By 1978, he had the southern and eastern pastures fenced and productive, the ranch house built to a standard that would last, and a persistent practical problem he had been working around since the beginning. Getting from the ranch to the county highway required crossing a neighboring property on a dirt track that the neighbor tolerated but had never formalized, and a tolerated crossing is not the same thing as a reliable one. He graded the western boundary road himself over 3 days in September. The route ran along the western edge of his deeded property, land he owned outright, purchased and recorded with no encumbrances, from the ranch house south and then west to the county highway connection at the valley's lower end. A 1/4 mile of graded gravel road through his own land, connecting his operation to the county system without depending on anyone else's permission or goodwill. He built it the way he built everything on the ranch, to last, to be useful, and to be his. He recorded the road as part of the property in 1979, not as a separate instrument, but as a clarifying notation in the ranch's deed, confirming that the road and the land it ran through were fee simple property of Raymond Baxter, subject to no encumbrance of any kind. The instrument number sat in the county recorder's office from that point forward, available to anyone who cared to look at it, which for the next 22 years meant primarily Raymond himself, his bank during the 1987 refinancing, and the county assessor's office during routine property tax reviews. When Raymond conveyed the ranch to Cord in 1991, the road conveyed with it. The conveyance deed was explicit. Every parcel, every improvement, every road and water right and easement appurtenant to the property transferred to Cord Baxter in fee simple, recorded under a new instrument number at the county recorder's office on a Tuesday morning in March 1991. Raymond was 57 at the time. He was not retiring. He stayed involved in ranch decisions for another decade, sharp and present and opinionated about cattle management and water rotation and the particular way the south pasture should be grazed in dry years. But the land was Cord's, and the road was Cord's, and both of those facts were in the public record for anyone to find. In the spring of 2001, a regional developer named Cascade Properties purchased the plateau land above and east of the ranch, a 340-acre parcel of high ground that had been used for intermittent grazing by the previous owner, and that Cascade's acquisition team had identified as suitable for residential subdivision development. The plateau sat above the valley, with a natural drainage to the east, a view across the Lake District that would photograph well in marketing materials, and a practical problem that any developer would have identified within the first site visit. It had no direct county road access. The plateau's topography made a direct eastern connection expensive and logistically complicated. The natural access route, the one the previous grazing operation had used for decades, ran down the western slope and connected to the county highway via the road along the Baxter Ranch's western boundary. Cascade's engineers put the access road on their preliminary site plan in April 2001, labeled as Existing Access Route, County Connection via Valley Road, and moved forward with the subdivision design on the assumption that the access question was solved. The developer's project manager, a man named Dennis Holt, drove the road in May and noted in his site visit report that it was well maintained, clearly established, and apparently in regular use. He does not appear to have pulled the deed. His report does not reference an ownership inquiry. It references the road as existing infrastructure and moves on to the grading specifications for the plateau development. In June 2001, Dennis Holt drove to the Baxter Ranch and knocked on the front door. Raymond answered. He was 67 by then, still lean, still unhurried, still the kind of man who listened to everything before he said anything. Dennis explained the development project, the access road need, the 287 homes Cascade planned to build on the plateau, and the developer's interest in using the Valley Road for construction access, and afterward, for permanent resident access to the county highway. Raymond listened to all of it. Then he said, yes, in the way that ranchers of his generation said yes to neighborly arrangements that cost them nothing in the near term, and that a handshake and a man's word were sufficient to secure. He said yes on the understanding, which he stated plainly, and which Dennis Holt apparently noted in his project file without fully registering its legal significance, that the road use was a courtesy extended by the property owner, and not a grant of any permanent right. Raymond did not want money. He did not want a formal agreement. He wanted Dennis to understand that the road belonged to the Baxters, and that the developer was being allowed to use it as a neighbor, not as a right holder. Dennis thanked him, drove back to the plateau, and added road access confirmed, existing route, verbal agreement with adjacent landowner to the project file. Nothing was signed, nothing was recorded. The subdivision approval application that Cascade submitted to the county planning office in August 2001 described the access road as an existing county-accessed valley road, providing primary connection to State Highway 12. The county planning office reviewed the application, noted the access route, and approved the subdivision without pulling the road deed to verify the ownership characterization. The planning office's file shows the access road labeled as existing infrastructure, which it was, and as county accessed, which it was in the sense that it connected to the county highway, and not at all in the sense of being county-owned or publicly maintained. 287 homes were built and sold on the plateau above the Baxter Ranch between 2002 and 2006. Every family that purchased a Pinnacle Ridge home drove the access road to reach their property. Every title insurance policy written for those purchases described the road as the primary access route without noting the absence of a recorded easement. Every family that moved into Pinnacle Ridge assumed, reasonably and incorrectly, that the road connecting their neighborhood to the county highway was either a public right-of-way or a properly recorded community easement. It was neither. Meredith Kane took over Cord's legal work in 2009 when his previous attorney retired. Her standard onboarding practice for any ranch client was a complete title review. Every parcel, every recorded instrument, every easement and right-of-way and encumbrance identified and characterized. She spent 2 days on the Baxter Ranch file. She found the road deed immediately. She found the subdivision plat with its ownership-free road label. She found the HOA's governing documents, describing the road as community infrastructure without any easement citation. She found no recorded easement, no right-of-way grant, no access agreement of any kind in the county recorder's records. She called Cord and told him what she had found. She gave him 2 options: negotiate a formal easement with the HOA, which would regularize the situation, and provide the 287 households with the legal access they believed they already had, or document the permitted nature of the road use in writing. A letter to the HOA confirming that access was a courtesy granted by the property owner and not a legal right, which would protect against any future prescriptive easement claim while leaving the arrangement functionally unchanged. Cord had thought about it for a week. He had no conflict with the HOA in 2009. The residents drove the road, maintained their end of the gravel in reasonable condition, and had never given him any reason to formalize a relationship that was working without formalization. Raising the road status formally meant having a conversation that would surprise and possibly alarm 287 households who believed their access was secure. It meant legal fees on both sides, negotiation, probably some friction, all to resolve a situation that wasn't causing anyone any problems. He chose neither option. He thanked Meredith for the review, filed the information in his own operational knowledge of the ranch, and went back to work. He told no one what Meredith had found. He continued to permit the road use the way his father had permitted it, as a neighborly matter, extended without conditions, maintained without discussion. For 12 years, that arrangement held. Then Sandra Hollis authorized a fence contractor to run a perimeter installation along the southern boundary and the western road without pulling a single deed. And the arrangement that Cord's silence had preserved became the instrument of its own unraveling. By early November, 2 months after the first fence and 4 hours after Cord's call from the western boundary, Meredith had the complete document picture assembled on her desk. The 1991 road deed, clean and unencumbered. The 2001 subdivision plat, with its ownership-absent road label. The HOA's governing documents with their easement-free access description, unless Holt's project file notation, verbal agreement with adjacent landowner, which she obtained through a public records request to the county planning office, and which was, she noted to Cord when she read it to him, the most useful 4 words a developer's project manager had ever written in a file she was building a case from. She calls Cord at 2 p.m. "They have been using your road for 22 years without a legal right to do it," she says. "And now they have physically asserted control over it by fencing it." Cord asks what the fence changes from a legal standpoint. Meredith tells him that 22 years of passive, unauthorized use permitted by the owner without objection, creates a prescriptive easement risk but not an established one, and that the risk is foreclosed by the permitted use evidence she is building. A fence is different. A fence is an active, physical assertion of ownership authority over property. The HOA does not own. It is not passive use. It is not ambiguous. It is a documented, permanent, photographable claim of control over his road. And it triggers trespass remedies that are immediate, specific, and not subject to the prescriptive use arguments the HOA might otherwise have attempted. She asks how he wants to proceed. He tells her the way his father would have told her. The same answer Raymond gave to every decision that mattered on this ranch, through every difficult season. Through every year that required something from a man who understood that land is patient, and the people who manage it well take their cues from it. Quietly, completely, and only when the record is ready. Meredith tells him the record is close. Cord thanks her and goes back to work. Sandra Hollis runs the Pinnacle Ridge HOA, the way certain people run every organization they have ever led, with momentum as the primary operational principle, the assumption that moving forward confidently is functionally equivalent to moving forward correctly, and the particular blind spot that develops in people who have held authority long enough to stop distinguishing between decisions that were challenged and failed and decisions that were never challenged at all. She has been board president for 5 years. In that time, she has pushed through a $230,000 clubhouse renovation, a community landscaping standards overhaul that generated 18 months of resident complaints before it was accepted, a parking enforcement program that remains controversial, and now the boundary fence project, a $94,000 community security and perimeter definition initiative that she presented to the board in June as a professional enhancement of the HOA's property edge, and sold to the membership in July, with the confident specificity of someone who has already decided the outcome and is presenting the vote as a courtesy. The board approved it 6-1. The one dissenting vote was cast by a member named Howard Kell, a former municipal planner who had asked, during the board discussion, whether a certified boundary survey had been commissioned before the fence line was established. Sandra had told him the HOA's existing site documentation was sufficient. Howard had voted no and said nothing further, which is the response of a man who has asked the right question, received a dismissive answer, and decided to let the situation teach the lesson he was unable to. Sandra retained the fence contractor in August, a regional agricultural fencing firm that builds perimeter installations across the Lake District and Valley properties, with the practiced efficiency of a company that has done this work long enough to know how to read a site map and establish a line. She gave them the HOA's internal site map. The developer produced document from 2001 that shows the community's property boundary running along the western and southern edges of the plateau development, and identifies the access road as community infrastructure without referencing its ownership. She told them to run the fence along the community perimeter, as shown. She did not commission a boundary survey. She did not pull the deed for the access road or for any portion of the Baxter Ranch. She did not contact Cord Baxter to discuss the fence line position, to notify him of the project, or to ask any question about the land on the other side of the boundary she was about to define with 6 strands of barbed wire and a contractor's concrete anchors. She sent him a letter, a single page on HOA letterhead, dated the week before construction began, informing him that the board had approved a community perimeter project and that a licensed contractor had been retained. The letter described the project as an enhancement to community security and a clarification of the HOA's property boundary. It invited him to contact the HOA's community liaison with any questions. He did not contact the community liaison. He did not respond to the letter in any form. He photographed it, added it to a file Meredith was building 40 miles away in a property rights office that Sandra had no knowledge of, and went back to his morning cattle rotation. Sandra read his silence as acceptance. This is the error that compounds every other error in the sequence, not the missing survey, not the unverified deed, not the developer's site map used as a legal instrument rather than a planning sketch. Those are the foundational failures. The compounding error is the interpretation of Cord's silence. Sandra has dealt with objecting neighbors before. She has dealt with property line disputes and fence confrontations, and the particular friction that arises when a community boundary touches a private landowner's sense of his own space. In her experience, people who object to things say so. They call, they send letters, they show up at board meetings. The fact that Cord Baxter has done none of these things in the 6 weeks since the southern boundary fence went up reads to her as a man who looked at the situation, weighed his options, and decided acceptance was easier than confrontation. It does not read to her as a man who called his attorney the morning the first fence appeared, and has been watching her add to his legal file every week since. The southern boundary fence is completed in mid-September, a clean, professional installation running the full length of the southern edge of the development, its HOA perimeter tags spaced at regular intervals, its posts set in concrete to the depth the contractor's standard specifies. Sandra sends the membership a progress update the week it is finished, describing the southern installation as the first phase of the community perimeter project, and noting that the western section, including the access road frontage, will be completed in October. The western section, the road fence, goes up in the last week of October. Sandra authorizes it on the basis that the first phase produced no resistance, and that completing the perimeter is the logical operational sequence. She does not ask the contractor to re-examine the boundary position before the second installation. She does not commission a survey between phases. She applies the same developer's site map, the same fence line position, and the same assumption that the silence she received after September is the silence she will continue to receive after October. The road fence goes in over 2 days. Working north to south, the posts set in concrete, the gate centered in the installation, the padlock and laminated tags in place by the morning of the 3rd day. The contractor sends Sandra a completion photo by text message on a Wednesday morning. She replies with a thumbs-up emoji and forwards the photo to the board with a note. Western phase complete. Community perimeter fully defined. Great outcome. Howard Kell receives the forwarded photo, looks at it for a long moment, and does not reply. In the 3rd week of October, between the authorization of the road fence and its completion, Sandra sends Cord Baxter a second letter. This letter is different from the first. The first letter notified him of a fence project. The second letter informs him that the HOA intends to pave the access road with HOA funds as a community infrastructure improvement, that the project has been budgeted for the following spring, and that the board anticipates the paving will significantly enhance the resident experience and the long-term durability of the community's primary access route. It is signed by Sandra Hollis, board president. It does not request his consent. It does not acknowledge his ownership of the road. It does not contain any legal citation or easement reference. It is the letter of a woman who has concluded, from 2 months of unchallenged fence installation and a developer's site map she has never questioned, that the road is the HOA's to improve. Cord receives the letter on a Thursday morning, reads it at the kitchen table the way he read the first letter, completely, from start to finish, without skimming, and then sets it on the table and sits with it for a moment. Then he photographs it, scans it, and emails it to Meredith with a single line. Second letter, paving project, spring. No response from me. Your call. Meredith calls him back in 20 minutes. Her tone when she calls is the particular tone of an attorney who has just received a piece of evidence that is better than anything she could have manufactured. The combination of professional satisfaction and restrained urgency that comes when an opponent documents their own intent in writing and mails it to you. She has announced in a signed letter on HOA letterhead her intention to make permanent infrastructure improvements to your private road, Meredith says, without an easement, without your consent, without any legal authority to authorize the expenditure of HOA funds on property the HOA does not own. Cord asks if they should send a response. Meredith tells him absolutely not. A response from Cord at this stage, any response, even a simple acknowledgement of receipt, gives Sandra the opportunity to retract the paving announcement, modify her stated intentions, and deny the evidentiary value of the letter before it becomes part of the filed record. The letter is Exhibit F in the complaint package Meredith is building. It stays as Exhibit F. Cord stays silent. She tells him the letter changes the legal character of the case in a specific and significant way. The fence installations were physical trespass, unauthorized structures on private property, documented and actionable. The paving letter is something more. It is written evidence of deliberate, premeditated intent to make permanent improvements to property the HOA does not own, signed by the individual responsible for authorizing the project. In a trespass case, intent matters for damages. Sandra has just provided documented intent in her own hand. Cord thanks her and ends the call. He adds the letter to the physical binder he has been maintaining on his ranch office desk since September, the same methodical documentation practice his father used, applied to a situation Raymond never had to navigate, because the people who came before Sandra had the basic professional courtesy to ask whose road they were planning to use before they planned to use it. Walt Pruitt calls on a Friday afternoon in early November, 2 days before Cord finds the road fence. Walt owns the 12-acre parcel immediately east of the ranch's northern boundary, a property he purchased in 1998 after retiring from 35 years as a civil engineer with a regional infrastructure firm. He is 71, unhurried, and has the professional habit of looking at constructed things and immediately reading their specifications, load-bearing assumptions, materials, alignment, and in the case of fence lines, position relative to recorded boundaries, which is information he can estimate from a county plat with an accuracy that most people would require expensive survey equipment to approach. He has been watching the southern boundary fence installation since September, with the increasing unease of a man who looked up the county plat the first week and has been doing the mental geometry ever since. Your southern fence, he says when Cord answers. The new one the HOA put up. It's not on their line. Cord asks where it is. Walt tells him it is on Cord's line, or more precisely, inside it. He has cross-referenced the post positions against the county plat boundary markers he can see from his property, and his estimate puts the fence running 25 to 30 inches inside the recorded Baxter deed boundary for its full length. The HOA has not built a fence on the HOA's southern edge. It has built a fence on a strip of Cord's grazing land. Cord is quiet for a moment. Walt asks if Cord is aware of this. Cord tells him yes, he is aware, and that it is being handled through the appropriate channels, and that he would appreciate Walt keeping the observation between the two of them for the time being. Walt is quiet, in the way that retired engineers are quiet when they have been given a professional instruction they recognize as correct, not passive, but processing. He asks if there is anything he can do. Cord thinks about that for a moment. He thinks about what Meredith has said about documentation, about the value of a third-party witness with professional credentials and no stake in the outcome. He thinks about Walt's 35 years reading construction plans, and his ability to look at a fence line and tell you where it sits relative to a recorded boundary, with the kind of precision that holds up when someone asks him to explain his methodology. He tells Walt there may be something he can do when the time comes, and that he will let him know. Walt says he will be available. Cord ends the call and sits at his ranch office desk for a moment, the binder open in front of him, Sandra's paving letter on top of the stack. Outside, through the office window, the access road runs west toward the county highway in the November afternoon light. The same quarter-mile his father graded in 1978. The same road that 287 households have driven every day for 22 years. The same road that Sandra Hollis has fenced, tagged, padlocked, and now announced her intention to pave in the spring. The spring that is not going to arrive before Meredith Kane files 47 pages in county court. Cord closes the binder, caps his pen, and goes to check the south pasture water. Meredith Kane has been practicing property rights law for 18 years, and in that time she has developed a professional conviction that most attorneys arrive at eventually, but few hold to with the consistency she does. The outcome of a property dispute is determined almost entirely before the filing, in the quality of what was documented, while the other side believed no documentation was happening. She begins building the Baxter record the morning of Cord's first call in September, the day the southern boundary fence appeared, and she does not stop building it until the last week of November, when every element she needs is certified, signed, and organized in a binder that is 4 inches thick and contains exactly one version of events, supported by instruments that will withstand whatever a defense attorney decides to challenge. The first thing she does is retain Philip Oakes. Philip is a licensed land surveyor who has worked the Valley and Lake District for 26 years, the kind of professional whose reputation among property rights attorneys is built not on the speed of his field work, but on its precision and its courtroom durability. Meredith has used him on 4 previous ranch boundary cases. She knows how he works, methodically, without shortcuts, with the understanding that a certified plat is a legal document rather than a planning sketch, and that every measurement it contains needs to be defensible to the sub-inch standard that opposing counsel will attempt to exploit if given any room. She calls him in the first week of October and gives him the assignment parameters: a full boundary survey of the Baxter Ranch, with specific emphasis on mapping the recorded property lines against the position of every HOA fence post from both installations. She tells him the southern fence went in September, and a second installation, the road fence, is anticipated before his field work begins. She asks him to time his first field visit for after both installations are complete, so the certified plat reflects the full scope of what the HOA has built. Philip schedules his first field visit for the second week of November, after Cord confirms the road fence is in place. He works from the 1991 deed, Raymond's 1979 road notation, and the county recorder's boundary monuments, the physical markers the county survey system established and maintains for precisely this kind of verification. He sets his total station at the Southern Reference Monument and begins working the boundary systematically, measuring every fence post position against the recorded deed line with the unhurried precision of a man who has done this work long enough to know that the measurement you rush is the measurement that gets challenged. The southern boundary fence work takes 2 field days. What Philip finds confirms what Cord measured with his GPS and what Walt estimated from the county plat, but confirms it with a legal precision that GPS readings and county plat cross-references cannot match. The fence runs inside Cord's property boundary by an average of 29 inches across its full installed length, not a uniform encroachment, which would suggest a simple parallel offset error, but a variable one, ranging from 22 inches at the eastern end to 37 inches at the western connection point. The variation matters legally because it indicates the fence line was not established from Cord's recorded boundary, but from the HOA's internal site map, which places the boundary in a different position than the deed, a fact that will become relevant when the question of whether the encroachment was negligent or deliberate is put in front of a judge. Philip notes the variation in his field log with the neutral precision of a surveyor, who reports what the measurements say rather than what any party wants them to say. The road fence work takes a 3rd field day. The road closure fence sits entirely on Cord's fee-simple road property, not at its edge, not straddling a disputed boundary zone, but centered on the road itself, its posts driven into the road surface and anchored in concrete that Philip photographs from 3 positions before measuring. 11 of the fence posts are anchored in the roadbed, in the graded gravel surface of a private road that has been in the Baxter family deed since 1979. Driven into Cord's property with a post driver and set with a concrete mix that, by Philip's estimate from the cure stage he photographs, went in approximately 48 to 72 hours before Cord found the fence on the Wednesday morning. Philip completes his field work in the 3rd week of November. He produces the certified plat in the final week, a document that maps every element of both HOA installations against the recorded Baxter deed boundary in a single illustrated instrument, every measurement tied to the county monument system, every encroachment identified by type, dimension, and legal land description, with Philip's professional seal and license number on the certification page. Meredith adds it to the binder. The chain of title analysis arrives the same week. She had retained a title specialist named Carol Vance in October, a professional who spends her working life tracing property histories through county recorder archives, and whose particular skill is finding the absence of things, the gaps in recorded instruments, where an easement or right-of-way or access agreement should exist and does not. Carol traces the access road from Raymond Baxter's 1971 land purchase, through the 1979 road notation, through the 1991 conveyance to Cord, through the 2001 subdivision development and the 2002 through 2006 home sales, to the present. Her analysis runs 16 pages. Its conclusion occupies 4 sentences on page 16. No easement has ever been recorded in favor of Pinnacle Ridge HOA, or its predecessor developer, Cascade Properties. No right-of-way grant exists in the county recorder's records. No access agreement of any kind appears in any instrument in the chain of title. The road is the unencumbered, fee-simple property of Cord Baxter, and the 22 years of resident use the HOA has facilitated across it rests on a verbal courtesy arrangement that the current property owner's attorney documented as permitted use in a 2009 title review memo, a copy of which Carol notes in the analysis as Exhibit C in the accompanying package. Meredith adds Carol's analysis to the binder. Walt Pruitt's written statement arrives in a sealed envelope in mid-November. Meredith had contacted Walt after Cord told her about the Friday afternoon phone call, about Walt's professional observation of the southern fence position, about his 35 years in civil engineering, about his presence at the Baxter Ranch the morning the developer's representative came to discuss road access in 2001. That last detail is the one that makes Walt's statement something more than a neighbor's corroboration. Walt had been at the ranch that morning, visiting Raymond to discuss a shared drainage question on their common property line, and had been present, within earshot of the front porch conversation, when Dennis Holt explained the development project, and Raymond said yes as a neighborly matter. Walt's statement is 5 pages, notarized, written in the precise and unambiguous language of a man who spent 35 years producing technical documents and understands the difference between what he observed and what he interpreted. He describes the 2001 conversation between Raymond Baxter and the developer's representative. He states, in direct language, that Raymond's consent was framed explicitly as a courtesy and not a permanent grant. He quotes Raymond's words as he remembers them. "You can use the road. Just understand it's our road, and we're letting you use it as neighbors. That's the arrangement." He describes his 33 years of observing road use by Pinnacle Ridge residents as permitted access that no one from the HOA ever attempted to formalize or question. He describes his professional observation of the southern fence position and his estimate of the encroachment distance, noting his methodology and its limitations compared to certified survey work. He signs the statement with his professional credentials listed beneath his name. Walter Pruitt, P.E., retired, civil engineering license number, 35 years infrastructure design and construction management. Meredith adds the statement to the binder. Sandra's escalation trail takes its own section, a chronological documentary record of every communication and authorization that establishes the sequential, deliberate nature of the HOA's encroachment. The June board meeting minutes approving the boundary project, the August contractor authorization, the September first fence notification letter to Cord, the October membership progress update describing the completed southern installation, the October second fence authorization, the November completion photo Sandra texted to the contractor and forwarded to the board, and Exhibit F, the paving intention letter, dated the 3rd week of October, signed by Sandra Hollis, announcing the HOA's plan to make permanent infrastructure improvements to a road she apparently believed she had the authority to improve. Meredith reads Exhibit F again when she places it in the binder. She has read it 4 times since Cord sent her the scan. Each time she reads it, she notes the same thing. It is the document that transforms a trespass case into something with a damages dimension that a jury will find straightforward. A fence on a property line can be argued as a survey error, a good faith mistake, a contractor misreading a map. A signed letter announcing your intention to permanently pave a road you do not own cannot be argued as anything except what it is. She calls Cord in the last week of November. She tells him the record is complete. Philip's certified plat is sealed and signed. Carol's chain of title analysis is finished. Walt's statement is notarized. Sandra's escalation documentation is organized chronologically, with every exhibit numbered. The complaint is drafted, 41 pages plus 12 exhibits, and ready for filing the moment Cord decides on the timing. Cord asks about the paving project. He asks it the way he asks everything, simply, directly, without the particular anxiety that the question might carry for someone less certain of their ground. The paving project Sandra announced for spring is the thing he wants to understand in terms of timing. Does it change when they move? Meredith tells him it does not change the timing in any direction that favors waiting. The paving project is a spring initiative. The road closure fence has been in place since early November. Every day the fence stands across his road is another documented day of unauthorized physical control over his property, by a party with no recorded right to exercise it. And every day that passes between Sandra's paving letter and the filing is another day she could theoretically retract the letter or modify her public position. Though Meredith notes that the letter is already in the county's hands as part of the permit application Sandra apparently filed for the paving project in late October, which means it is a public record document that cannot be retracted, regardless of what Sandra does now. She tells him they will not reach spring. Cord asks what the timeline looks like. Meredith tells him filing can happen within the week. The closure notice, the formal document that accompanies the legal filing and serves as the HOA's first official notification that the road is being closed to unauthorized traffic, can be delivered simultaneously with the complaint, or slightly ahead of it if Cord wants the HOA to read the deed before the complaint lands. Cord thinks about that. He thinks about 287 households who are going to discover, at the moment the closure notice arrives, that the road they have driven every day for 22 years is private property and is no longer available to them. He thinks about them the way his father would have thought about them, not as adversaries, not as participants in Sandra's decisions, but as neighbors who bought homes in reasonable good faith on the basis of access they believed was legally secured and are about to find out it was not. He asks Meredith to send the closure notice before the complaint. She asks why. He tells her he wants the HOA to have 24 hours with the deed in their hands before anything else happens. Not as a negotiating gesture, not as a legal concession, as the thing his father would have done, giving the other side a single day to understand what they are looking at before the full weight of what they have built lands on them. Meredith is quiet for a moment. Then she tells him she will have the closure notice ready by Monday. Cord closes his logbook, picks up his hat from the desk, and walks out to check the cattle before the light goes. Cord drives to the western gate at 7 a.m. on a Monday morning in early December, with two things in the truck. The closure notice Meredith prepared, printed on her firm's letterhead, and signed under her professional credentials, and the padlock his father bought in 1991 and hung on the original ranch gate the year the deed transferred, a heavy brass lock that has sat in the ranch office drawer for 22 years, waiting with the patient indifference of hardware for the morning it would be needed. He parks at the gate position. He gets out of the truck in the gray December morning light, the temperature low enough to see his breath, the road empty in both directions. He takes the closure notice from the passenger seat, 2 pages plus attachments, the certified boundary survey and chain of title analysis paper-clipped behind it, the 1991 road deed behind those, and attaches it to the gate post with a weatherproof sleeve he prepared the previous evening. He reads it once more while it is on the post, the way he reads everything that is going to matter. The notice states, in Meredith's flat and legally precise language, that the private access road on the Baxter Ranch property is closed to all non-authorized traffic, effective immediately. It states that the road is the fee simple property of Cord Baxter, recorded under instrument number at the county recorder's office, subject to no easement, right-of-way, or access agreement of any recorded kind. It states that the Pinnacle Ridge HOA's installation of fence structures on and across the road constitutes unauthorized trespass on private property, for which Cord Baxter reserves all legal remedies. It attaches the certified boundary survey as Exhibit A, the chain of title analysis as Exhibit B, and the 1991 road deed as Exhibit C. It invites the HOA to contact Meredith Kane's office to discuss resolution. Cord closes the gate, threads the chain through the post bracket, and snaps the padlock shut. He gets back in the truck and sits for a moment, the engine idling, looking at the gate from the driver's seat. The closure notice is visible on the post in its weatherproof sleeve. The padlock is the color of old brass in the morning light. The road beyond the gate runs west toward the county highway, the way it has always run. Straight, well-graded, the gravel surface maintained in the practical condition of a road that has been used by several hundred households every day for 2 decades. He makes a note in his logbook, 7:08 a.m., Monday, December 3rd. Road closure notice posted, gate closed and padlocked. Certified mail delivered to HOA office simultaneously per Meredith. No contact with HOA. He drives back to the ranch house, makes fresh coffee, and goes to feed the cattle. The certified mail arrives at the Pinnacle Ridge HOA office at 10:15 a.m. The office manager, a woman named Terry who has worked the HOA administrative desk for 9 years and has a reliable instinct for which pieces of correspondence require immediate escalation, signs for the envelope, notes the return address of Meredith Kane's property rights firm, and carries it directly to Sandra's office without opening it herself. Sandra opens it. She reads the first paragraph. She reads the second paragraph. She turns to Exhibit C, the 1991 road deed, and reads the legal description. She calls Brett Vogel at 10:22 a.m. Brett Vogel has been the Pinnacle Ridge HOA's general counsel for 6 years. He handles the HOA's standard legal work, covenant enforcement matters, contractor disputes, the occasional boundary disagreement with an adjacent property owner that gets resolved through a letter exchange and a handshake. He is competent, experienced with community association law, and has never handled a matter quite like the one Sandra is describing to him over the phone. A situation where the community's primary access road has been closed by a private landowner who apparently holds the deed to it, is represented by a property rights attorney who has filed a certified boundary survey and a chain of title analysis, and has given the HOA simultaneous formal notice that its fence installations constitute trespass on his property. Brett asks Sandra to scan and email him the complete closure notice and all attachments immediately. She does. He reads the closure notice and the deed at his desk. He reads the chain of title analysis summary. He reads Philip Oak's certified plat notation on the road fence position. He reads Carol Vance's 16-page title analysis and its 4-sentence conclusion. He reads the 2009 Meredith Kane title review memo that Carol includes as a reference, the memo in which Meredith identified the road's unencumbered status 13 years before the fence went up and advised Cord on his options. The 2009 memo takes Brett the longest to read, because it is the document that establishes the timeline most clearly, that the road's private ownership status was identified and documented a decade before Sandra's boundary project, that the HOA had been using the road without recorded access rights for a period that predates Sandra's tenure as board president, and that the current situation is the consequence of a structural legal gap that has existed since the subdivision was developed, and that Sandra's fence project has now made impossible to continue ignoring. He calls Sandra back at 1:30 p.m. His assessment takes 22 minutes. He delivers it in the measured, careful register of an attorney communicating an unfavorable legal position to a client who is not going to find it easy to hear. He tells her the road deed is clean, fee-simple ownership, no encumbrances, properly recorded, clearly conveyed. The chain of title analysis is thorough and accurate. The certified boundary survey is a litigation-grade document produced by a licensed surveyor whose work he recognizes as credentialed and defensible. The 2009 memo establishes that the road's private status was known and documented 13 years ago, which forecloses any argument that the HOA was acting in good faith on a mistaken understanding of the road's legal character. He tells her the fence installations, both the southern boundary fence and the road closure fence, sit on private property the HOA has no legal right to occupy or control. The road closure is within Cord Baxter's rights as the documented property owner. The HOA's position in a contested proceeding on any of these tracts is not strong. Sandra asks about prescriptive easement, the argument that 22 years of continuous road use has created a legal access right. Brett tells her the permitted use evidence forecloses it. Walt Pruitt's notarized statement, which Meredith has included in the notice package as a supplementary exhibit, documents the 2001 conversation in which Raymond Baxter explicitly characterized the road use as a courtesy. Prescriptive easement requires hostile, adverse use, use without the owner's permission. 22 years of permitted use, documented by a credentialed eyewitness, does not meet that standard under state law. Sandra does not respond to Brett's assessment immediately. She sits with it in the way that people sit with information that restructures a situation they believed they understood. Brett tells her he recommends contacting Meredith Kane's office to begin resolution discussions. He tells her the HOA's exposure, trespass on the road, trespass on the southern grazing land, the paving intention letter, is significant enough that a protracted, contested proceeding would be substantially more expensive and damaging than a negotiated resolution. Sandra tells him she will call him back. She does not repeat Brett's assessment to the board for several days. By 5 p.m. Monday, Walt Pruitt is standing at his property line with the particular attentiveness of a man who has been watching this situation develop since September and has positioned himself to observe its first public consequence. He watches from across the fence line as the afternoon commuter traffic from Pinnacle Ridge begins arriving at Cord's Gate and stopping. The first car arrives at 4:47 p.m. A blue sedan whose driver pulls up to the closed gate, reads the closure notice, and sits in her car for a long moment before reversing and turning around. The second car arrives at 5:03 p.m., the third at 5:11 p.m. By 5:30 p.m., Walt has counted 27 vehicles backed up along the approach road. their drivers standing outside their cars in the December cold, reading the notice, reading the deed attached beneath it, talking to each other in the low, unsettled register of people processing something that contradicts what they believed about their own property situation. He watches one man read the notice 3 times. He watches a woman call someone on her phone and hold the phone to her ear for a long time without speaking, listening. He watches a group of 4 drivers gather at the gate post and read the chain of title analysis summary together in the fading afternoon light, their faces carrying the particular expression of people encountering a legal document that answers a question they did not know they needed to ask. Walt calls Cord at 6:15 p.m. 27 cars, he says. Cord is at the kitchen table with the logbook. He notes the number. Tomorrow will be more, he says. Walt is quiet for a moment. He asks if Cord is all right. Cord tells him he is fine. He tells Walt that none of the people standing at that gate this evening made the decision that put them there. Not a single one of them authorized the fence project, signed the paving letter, or chose to route a subdivision's primary access through private property without an easement. They are the consequence of decisions made above them, first by a developer in 2001, and most recently by a board president in October of this year. Walt says he understands. Cord tells him to go inside. It is getting cold. By Tuesday evening, the backup is 41 cars. By Wednesday, it is the consistent daily reality of 287 households attempting to reach the county highway via a route that is no longer available to them. Some using the alternate eastern access route that adds 40 minutes to every trip, some parking at the county road and walking in, most sitting in the backed-up queue and reading the closure notice at the gate, because reading it again feels more productive than the 40-minute detour. The HOA's resident online forum, which normally carries the routine traffic of community announcements and complaints about parking and lawn maintenance standards, generates 340 posts across 3 threads by Sunday evening. The threads carry different titles but a single underlying question, the question that runs beneath all of it, that surfaces in post after post in various phrasings. If the road belongs to the rancher, how did 287 households purchase homes here without a legal right of access to the county highway? Nobody on the forum has a satisfying answer to this question. Brett Vogel has one, which he has shared with Sandra, and which Sandra has not shared with the board. Howard Kell has an approximate one, constructed from the title research he did privately after the fence project vote, which he has not shared publicly because he is waiting to see how Sandra chooses to handle the situation she has created. Sandra calls an emergency board meeting for Sunday evening at 7 p.m. in the clubhouse conference room. She sends the membership a brief notice describing the meeting as an update on a boundary matter with an adjacent landowner that the HOA's attorneys are actively working to resolve. She does not describe it as a situation in which 287 households have been without legal road access for 6 days because the board president approved a fence installation on a road she never verified the HOA had the right to fence. She does not mention that Brett Vogel's 2-hour preliminary assessment contained no element that supports the phrase actively resolving in any sense that implies a favorable outcome for the HOA's current position. She arrives at the Sunday meeting with the composed, forward-facing expression of a woman who has decided that the posture she presents to the board will be confidence, because confidence has carried every previous decision she has made in 5 years of board leadership, and she has not yet fully internalized the distinction between situations where confidence is a useful management tool and situations where confidence is the reason the situation exists. Howard Kell sits at the far end of the conference table and does not say anything during Sandra's opening remarks. He is waiting. Grace Ewan wakes at 4:45 a.m. on Tuesday and sits at her kitchen table with the closure notice documents she has been reading since Monday afternoon, the road deed, the chain of title analysis, Philip Oak's certified plat, and the 2-page notice itself, spread in front of her with the methodical organization of a woman who spent 31 years as a civil litigation attorney and still reads documents the way she always read them, in sequence, completely, with a legal pad beside her and a pen in her hand. She retired from practice 4 years ago. She bought her Pinnacle Ridge home in 2004, the second year of the subdivision's existence, on the basis of a title report that described the access road as the community's primary access route and attached no ownership encumbrance flag to it. She has driven that road every day for 19 years. She has served on the HOA's Architectural Review Committee for 6 of those years. She has attended board meetings, voted in board elections, paid her assessments, and operated on the assumption that the legal infrastructure underlying her home purchase was sound. She now has the chain of title analysis in front of her, and the assumption is not holding. Carol Vance's 16-page analysis is thorough in the way that good title work is thorough. It does not reach conclusions before the evidence supports them, and it does not shade its findings for any party's benefit. Grace reads it as she would read opposing counsel's expert report, looking for overreach, for conclusions that exceed the underlying data, for methodological gaps that a cross-examination could exploit. She finds none. The chain of recorded instruments is clear. The 1979 road notation is clear. The 1991 conveyance is clear. The absence of any easement, dedication, or access agreement in 22 years of subsequent recorder filings is clear. Carol Vance has not argued a position. She has described what exists in the public record and what does not. And what does not exist is any legal right of access in favor of the 287 households who have been using Cord Baxter's road every day since 2002. Grace writes 4 pages of notes on the legal pad. Then she opens her laptop. She posts to the HOA's resident forum at 6:03 a.m. a thread titled, "What the Notice Actually Says. Please read before the meeting tonight." She writes 1,400 words. She writes them the way she wrote briefs for 3 decades, in plain language, organized sequentially, without inflammatory framing or advocacy language, because she is not trying to alarm people, and she is not trying to advocate for any party. She is trying to ensure that 287 households walk into Tuesday evening's board meeting, understanding what the documents actually say, rather than what Sandra Hollis has described them as saying. She explains the fee simple ownership. She explains what a fee simple deed means, and why the absence of a recorded easement matters. She explains the chain of title finding, that no access right has ever been formally recorded, that the road use has been a courtesy arrangement for 22 years, and that a courtesy arrangement, however long-standing, does not create a legal access right under state property law. She explains the trespass claims, the southern boundary fence running inside Cord's property line, the road closure fence sitting on his road, the legal remedies that attach to unauthorized permanent structures on private land. Then she addresses Exhibit F. She describes the paving intention letter carefully, not with the outrage that several subsequent forum posts will apply to it, but with the precise legal framing that makes it more alarming than outrage would. She writes, "The board president sent a signed letter to the property owner in October announcing the HOA's plan to permanently pave his road without his consent, without an easement, and apparently without any awareness that the road is his property. This letter is now attached to a legal filing as evidence of intentional encroachment. It is a public record document. It cannot be retracted." She closes the post with a single question, stated plainly. Before tonight's meeting, the board should be asked to explain what title research was conducted on the access road before the fence project was authorized, and which recorded instrument confirmed the HOA's authority over it. She posts it and makes coffee. By 7:30 a.m., the thread has 61 replies. By 9 a.m., it has 187. The replies sort themselves into categories with the natural distribution that forum responses always take in a community that has just discovered it may have a shared legal problem. The people asking clarifying questions, the people expressing alarm, the people attempting to reassure others with information they do not actually have. The people whose legal backgrounds give them enough context to add to rather than dilute Grace's analysis. And the people asking the question that surfaces in 14 separate posts by 9 a.m., with enough consistency to constitute the community's central demand for the evening meeting. Did Sandra know the road was private property when she authorized the fence? Walt Pruitt reads the thread at his kitchen table at 8 a.m. He reads it with the quiet recognition of a man who has watched this situation develop from its earliest stage and is now watching the community catch up to what he has known for weeks. He does not post a reply. He has already given his account in a notarized statement that is sitting in Meredith Kane's binder. What he has to say about the situation has been said in the format that matters. He drives to the Pinnacle Ridge Clubhouse parking lot at 6:45 p.m. and sits in his truck. He is not a Pinnacle Ridge resident. He has no standing to attend the board meeting as a member. But the clubhouse sits on the boundary of the development, and the parking lot is accessible from the county side. And Walt has never needed a formal invitation to observe a situation he has a professional and neighborly interest in. He sits in the truck with the window cracked, watching the members arrive, watching the lot fill with cars whose drivers are moving toward the clubhouse entrance, with the focused, deliberate energy of people who have been reading a forum thread since 6 a.m. and have been preparing questions for 6 hours. The meeting room holds 40 people at capacity. 63 arrive. The overflow stands in the hallway and along the back wall, their phones out, Grace's post pulled up on screens throughout the room as a reference document. Sandra and Brett Vogel are already seated at the board table when the members file in. Sandra with the composed, forward-facing expression she has chosen for the evening. Brett with the neutral, watchful stillness of an attorney who knows exactly how much of what is about to happen he can control and has made his peace with the answer. Howard Kell sits at the far end of the board table with a yellow legal pad in front of him, and nothing written on it yet. He watches Sandra prepare her opening remarks, with the patient attention of a man who has been waiting for this particular meeting since June, when he asked about the boundary survey and was told the existing site documentation was sufficient. Sandra opens at 7:02 p.m. She describes the situation in the language she has been using since Monday. A boundary dispute with an adjacent landowner, the HOA's attorneys actively engaged, a resolution being pursued through appropriate legal channels. She tells the membership that the road access disruption is temporary. She tells them the board is committed to protecting the community's interests. She does not use the phrase private property. She does not use the phrase no recorded easement. She does not mention Exhibit F. She opens the floor for member questions at 7:18 p.m. Grace Ewan raises her hand from the front row. She is 63, unhurried, wearing the same composed expression she carried into courtrooms for 3 decades. Not hostile, not theatrical, simply present and precise. She has her printed documents on her knee, the chain of title analysis, Philip Oak's certified plat, and the paving intention letter. She does not need to read from them. She has read them enough times that the relevant portions are available to her without the page. She states her name for the record. She identifies herself as a Pinnacle Ridge homeowner since 2004 and a retired civil litigation attorney. She asks Sandra whether a title search was conducted on the access road before the board authorized the boundary fence project. Sandra says the HOA relied on its existing site documentation. The room is attentive, in the way that rooms become attentive when the first question of a meeting has identified exactly the territory the meeting is going to occupy for the rest of the evening. Grace asks what existing site documentation confirmed the HOA's ownership or access rights to the road. Sandra says the HOA's records indicated the road was community infrastructure. Grace asks which recorded instrument those records cited. Specifically, which instrument number from the county recorder's office the HOA relied on when it characterized the road as community infrastructure. Sandra looks at Brett Vogel. Brett does not look back at her. He is looking at his notepad with the focused neutrality of an attorney who has been asked by his client not to speak during the member open forum, and is honoring that instruction even as the exchange in front of him proceeds in the direction he anticipated it would proceed when he read the 2009 Meredith Kane title review memo on Monday afternoon. Sandra looks back at Grace. The room is very quiet. It is the particular quiet of 63 people in a meeting room who have all read the same forum thread and asked themselves the same question, and are now watching the answer to that question arrive in real time, in the form of a silence that is itself an answer. Because a board president who commissioned a title search on a road before spending $94,000 to fence it would have an instrument number, and a board president who does not have one for a specific reason that everyone in this room has been able to read on their phone since 6 o'clock this morning. Sandra says the HOA's internal records were understood to reflect the community's established boundary. Grace asks whether those internal records were based on a surveyed property line or on the developer's original 2001 site map. Sandra says the board relied on the documentation available to it. Howard Kell writes something on his legal pad for the first time. Grace sets the paving intention letter on her knee and looks at it for a moment, not reading it, simply resting her attention on it in a way that is visible to Sandra and to the first 3 rows of the room. Then she looks up. She asks one final question. She asks it in the same plain, unhurried register she has used for every previous question, not as an accusation, not as a rhetorical maneuver, but as the question it is. A former litigator asking a board president the single question that the evening and the situation and the 4-inch binder in Meredith Kane's office have all been building toward. She asks whether Sandra was aware, when she sent the October letter announcing the HOA's intention to pave the access road, that the road is the fee simple private property of Cord Baxter. The room holds its breath in the collective, involuntary way of people watching a question land that they have been waiting to hear asked aloud. Sandra does not answer immediately. She looks at the table in front of her. She looks at Brett Vogel, who is still looking at his notepad. She looks at the room. 63 members, their phones with Grace's forum post on the screens, the hallway visible through the open back door, where another dozen people are standing in the overflow. She says she believed the letter to be consistent with the board's understanding of the community's infrastructure. Grace nods once, the nod of a woman who has the answer she came to the meeting to get, delivered in the exact form she expected it to take. She says thank you, sits back in her chair, and does not ask another question for the rest of the evening. She does not need to. Howard Kell fills the legal pad. Sandra Hollis resigns on a Thursday morning, 8 days after the road closure, in the way that people resign when resignation has stopped being a choice and become the only remaining option on a list that their attorney has reviewed and reduced to one. Her letter to the board secretary is 2 paragraphs. The first thanks the Pinnacle Ridge community for 5 years of service and describes those years as a privilege. The second states that she is stepping down from the board presidency to address personal legal matters arising from the boundary definition project. She does not specify which legal matters. She does not mention the fence. She does not mention the road deed. She does not mention Grace Ewan's question at the Tuesday meeting, the question she was unable to answer in front of 63 members and their phones, and the particular silence of a room that already knew the answer and was waiting to watch her not have it. What happened between Tuesday evening and Thursday morning occupied 2 days of private legal consultation, a Wednesday afternoon board session in which Brett Vogel finally delivered, to the full board rather than to Sandra alone, the assessment he had communicated to her on Monday, and that she had not shared with anyone since. Brett told the board what he had told Sandra. The road deed is clean, the chain of title analysis is accurate, the certified plat is litigation grade, the prescriptive easement argument fails on the permitted use evidence, and the paving intention letter, Exhibit F, is a public record document bearing Sandra's signature in which she announced her intent to permanently improve private property she had no legal authority to touch. Howard Kell asked Brett during that session what the personal liability exposure looked like for the signatory on the paving letter. Brett told him it was not insubstantial. Sandra retained a personal attorney that evening. By Thursday morning, the personal attorney had reviewed the same documents Brett reviewed and arrived at the same place Brett arrived, and the recommendation was the one that Sandra's situation had been moving toward since the Tuesday evening silence that Grace Ewan's third question had produced. Step down. Address the personal exposure. Stop being the public-facing officer of an organization whose legal problems have now become inseparable from her own. She sends the email at 8:44 a.m. and does not come into the HOA office. Howard Kell reads the resignation letter at his kitchen table, sets it down, and sits with it for a moment in the way of a man who has been watching a situation move toward a specific outcome for a long time and is now watching it arrive. He became a board member 2 years ago because he believed in community governance done with professional rigor, and he has spent those 2 years watching governance done without it, raising careful questions at the margins of decisions that were going to be made regardless of what he said, and recording his dissenting votes in the minutes with the patient discipline of someone building a record. He assumes the interim board presidency at noon. He calls Meredith Kane's office at 3:47 p.m. He identifies himself and his new role. He tells her 2 things before she responds. He tells her the board is not contesting the boundary survey, the chain of title analysis, or any element of the trespass documentation. And he tells her the board's objective is a recorded easement that gives 287 families the legal access to the county highway that they should have had since 2001, and a resolution of the trespass claims that is fair to Cord Baxter in full. Meredith thanks him and tells him she will call her client. She calls Cord within the hour. She reads him the substance of Howard's call in the precise, efficient manner she uses when she has good information to deliver and wants the relevant details to land clearly. She tells him about Howard's background, the municipal planning experience, the 2 years of board membership, the June vote against the boundary project. She tells him Howard's stated intentions are unambiguous and that his framing, fair to Cord Baxter in full, is not the language of a man looking for the minimum acceptable resolution. Cord asks the question he always asks when he is evaluating a stated intention against a legal position: whether Howard's stated goals are consistent with what the HOA's own attorney has told them their options are. Meredith tells him Brett Vogel reviewed every document in her binder and reached the same conclusions she reached. The HOA has no viable defense on the trespass tracks, no prescriptive easement argument that survives Walt's notarized statement, and a paving intention letter in the public record that creates personal liability for the person who signed it, and governance liability for the board that did not catch it. Howard's intentions are the correct reading of a situation that has no viable alternative direction. Cord says he has no objection to the conference. He asks about the road. Meredith asks what he means. He tells her he wants to reopen the road before the conference. Not as a legal concession, the closure is within his rights, and the complaint can proceed regardless of whether the road is open or closed. But as a practical matter, of the 287 households who drove that road in reasonable reliance on access they believed was legally secure, and who had nothing to do with the fence project, the paving letter, or any of the decisions that produced the closure. The alternate eastern route adds 40 minutes to every trip. They have been driving it for a week. The conference is next week. There is no reason to keep the road closed for the 10 days between now and the settlement. Meredith tells him it is his road and his decision. He drives to the western gate Friday morning at 6:45 a.m., He removes the closure notice from the post and unlocks the padlock. The same brass lock his father bought in 1991, back in the ranch office drawer now, its work done. He swings the gate open and stands beside it as the first car comes through at 7:02 a.m. A gray sedan whose driver slows as she passes the open gate, and looks at Cord standing beside it with the particular, cautious gratitude of someone who does not yet fully understand what changed, but knows the road is open. He watches the morning traffic move through for 20 minutes. Then he drives back to the ranch. Walt calls that afternoon. "You opened it," he says. "Conference is next week," Cord says. "No reason to keep it closed." Walt is quiet for a moment, in the way he is always quiet when he is thinking rather than pausing. Then he tells Cord he will be available for the conference in whatever capacity is needed. Technical witness, background reference, supporting presence. Whatever Cord and Meredith decide is useful. Cord thanks him. The settlement conference convenes the following Wednesday in the offices of a neutral county attorney retained to facilitate. The room holds 6 principals, Meredith and a paralegal on Cord's side, Howard Kell and Brett Vogel on the board's side, and Grace Ewan in the 6th chair. Howard's invitation to her had come the Friday morning after the board session, a phone call in which Howard told her that the community members who would live under the settlement terms for the foreseeable future deserved a representative in the room who understood the documents well enough to evaluate what they were agreeing to. Grace had accepted without hesitation. Meredith sets the binder on the table. She does not open it once during 2 days of negotiation. Howard does not ask her to. The facts are not in dispute. The conference is a construction exercise. What does the correct resolution look like, described with enough precision that it holds for the next 50 years without ambiguity, and executed with enough care that the 287 households, who were not responsible for the situation that produced the conference, can rely on the outcome? Howard arrives with the intention he stated on the phone, and holds to it across every difficult term, with the consistency of a man who decided on his approach before entering the room. When specific numbers become uncomfortable, he works through them rather than around them. When Brett raises procedural alternatives, Howard measures them against the standard he set at the opening, fair to Cord Baxter in full, and evaluates them accordingly. Grace asks questions when the technical property language requires translation for the community perspective. She asks them with the precision of a retired litigator and the practicality of a homeowner who will drive the road under this easement for the rest of the time she lives in Pinnacle Ridge. Her questions make the settlement better. Howard recognizes this and tells her so on the second afternoon. The settlement is 4 terms and takes 2 days in the room and 10 more days to reduce to a signed instrument. The first term is the easement, a formal recorded access easement granting permanent vehicular rights to Pinnacle Ridge HOA and its member residents over the Baxter Ranch access road, running with the land, binding on successors, filed in the county recorder's office, alongside Cord's deed and Carol Vance's chain of title analysis, as a permanent part of the public record. The easement is the document that should have been negotiated with Raymond Baxter before the first Pinnacle Ridge home sold in 2001. It is 22 years late, and it is now recorded. The second term is the payment, a negotiated one-time sum from the HOA to Cord, representing fair compensation for the formalization of access rights that the Baxter family extended as a courtesy for 2 decades, and that the HOA used without acknowledgement or compensation throughout that period. The figure is negotiated across the first afternoon. Both sides reach it without the distance between opening positions becoming the focus of the conversation, which is what happens when both sides come to a table with the genuine intention of reaching the correct number rather than the advantageous one. The third term is the fence removal, complete removal of both trespass installations within 90 days, at the HOA's full expense, with Philip Oakes supervising the boundary restoration, against his certified plat as the governing standard. The survey that documented every post position in the encroachment becomes the instrument that confirms every post position in the removal. The southern grazing land strip will be restored to its pre-fence condition, revegetated to match the surrounding boundary margin, and confirmed by Philip's field sign-off before the term is considered complete. The fourth term is the recorded acknowledgement, a formal instrument filed with the county recorder confirming the 1991 road deed's fee simple status, the absence of any prior recorded encumbrance, and the basis on which the new easement has been established. The instrument closes the public record gap that Dennis Holt's 2001 project file notation, verbal agreement with adjacent landowner, left open for 22 years. Cord signs the agreement on a Wednesday afternoon at the conference table. He reads every page before he signs, the way he reads every document that is going to have his name on it. He uncaps his pen, signs his name in the same unhurried hand he uses in the logbook, and caps the pen. He shakes Meredith's hand. He shakes Howard Kell's hand across the table, because Howard came to the conference with the right intention and held to it. And that is worth acknowledging, regardless of the circumstances that necessitated the conference. He nods to Grace Ewan, who nods back with the quiet recognition of two people who have each done what the situation required of them, without making more of it than it was. He drives home on his own road. The gate is still standing. It will come down within 90 days per the settlement terms, replaced by whatever entrance structure the easement agreement specifies. The HOA's padlock and laminated tag removed and disposed of, the post anchors extracted, and the entrance restored. But the road itself is the same road it has always been, running west through the late afternoon light toward the county highway, the way it ran when his father finished grading it in September 1978, and stood at the ranch end and looked at what he had built. Cord parks at the ranch house and sits in the truck for a moment before getting out. He looks at the western boundary through the windshield, the fence line still visible against the sky, the posts that will come down over the next 3 months, standing in the December light as they have stood since November. Temporary now. Numbered. He feeds the cattle on the evening rotation, comes back to the house, makes coffee, and sits on the porch with his logbook. He opens it to the first blank page after the most recent entry. He writes the date at the top. He writes the settlement terms in 3 sentences. Easement recorded, payment confirmed, both fences coming down within 90 days, boundary restoration to Philip Oakes's standard. He writes the names of the parties who signed. Then he writes a single final line in the margin, the way his father wrote the important notations in the volumes that precede this one on the ranch office shelf. Road deed confirmed. Easement recorded, both fences coming down. Matter closed. He caps the pen and closes the logbook. Walt calls at 7:18 p.m. He calls the way he has called at every significant moment in this story. From the Friday afternoon he identified the southern fence encroachment, to the evening he watched 27 cars back up at the gate, to the morning Cord reopened the road. Walt has been the quiet, credentialed, unhurried presence at the edge of this situation from the beginning. The man who saw it clearly because he was standing outside it and had spent 35 years learning how to read constructed things and understand where they actually sat. "It's done," he says. "It's done," Cord says. Walt is quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of a man who has been watching something build toward its resolution for months and is now sitting with the fact of the resolution. Then he says, "Your father always said that road would matter someday." Cord looks out from the porch at the western boundary in the last of the evening light. The gate stands at the road's ranch end, the fence posts on both sides of it still in the ground, the road running past them toward the county highway the way it has run since 1978. Through land that belonged to the Baxters, before the plateau above it had a development name, before the HOA's internal site map labeled it Community Infrastructure, before Dennis Holt wrote verbal agreement with adjacent landowner in a project file and moved on to the grading specifications, before Sandra Hollis authorized the fence contractor to run a perimeter line across a road she had never verified she had the authority to fence. The road has been here for 46 years. It will be here long after the fence posts come down and the easement is recorded, and the chain of title is complete, and the question of whose road it is has been answered in every instrument that matters. Raymond Baxter graded it with a tractor and a blade in September 1978 because he needed a way to get from his ranch to the county road, and he wanted that way to be his, clean, owned, unencumbered, dependent on no one's permission or goodwill. He built it to last, and he built it to be his, and he was right about both things, and about one more thing besides, which his son is sitting with on a December porch in the long settled quiet of a matter that has finally been closed. He was right, Cord says. He sets the logbook on the porch railing and watches the last light go off the road.